Charles, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Pleasure.
I have told you this before, but I was introduced to your work a little bit more than 10 years ago. And your trust equation, I was introduced to it when I worked predominantly with actuaries who love equations. And it was
Yes,
a very powerful tool. And so I wonder if you can walk us through your trust
sure,
equation.
sure. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, let me put it in context. First of all, the trust equation actually it should be called the trustworthiness equation. And let me put that in context. We use the word trust in three different ways. That's one of them. Let's think of the trust as a noun. It's a word we use to describe a relationship between two parties. There is trust between Jonathan and Charlie. There is a trust, it's a noun. Then there's the two other ones. One is trust, the verb, to trust somebody. What does it take to trust someone? I trust so and so, but not so and so. And finally, there is the adjective trustworthiness, which is what the trust equation is about. What are the attributes of somebody whom we trust? And the dynamic between the trustor and the trustee, the one who does the trusting and the one who is trusted, that's what creates trust, the noun, in the first place. So, with that overview, we're focusing really on trustworthiness. But that was probably the most famous part of the book, The Trusted Advisor, which is where that came from. So it's four components um, in the form of an equation, A plus B plus C over D. And the letters are C for credibility, R for reliability, I for intimacy. Those are all in the numerator. And then in the denominator, S for self-orientation. Because high self-orientation is a negative when it comes to trustworthiness. So three positive attributes: credible, reliable, intimate, all divided by S, self-orientation. And I can dive quickly into each of those four if you want, just to
Yeah,
flesh it
walk
out.
us through kind of the top of
Sure.
and we're able to see the equation on the screen. Walk us through
Yeah.
the top three, and then we'll split and go into the bottom, the
Okay,
divisor.
very good. When we think of somebody as being trustworthy, probably the most easy, quick thing that comes to mind is the C, credibility, or some people would say competence, expertise, capability, competence. He's good at what he does. He's got degrees from XYZ universities. He's been in this business for 35 years. He's a world-renowned expert. Credibility, good at what he does. So that's one, probably the one that most comes to mind. The second one that most frequently comes to people's minds, I think, is reliability. He does what he said he would do. He's got a track record, a proven record of delivery, performance. You can bet on the guy. If he says he's going to do it, he's going to do it. It's going to get done. The person you go to that never lets you down. So those two, by the way, the first two, credible and reliable, I think of as kind of the rational components of the trust equation. They're easily
If you want to table state.
quantifiable. It's easy to put numbers to them. By the way, reliability is the only one of the four which actually requires time. You hear this myth, oh, trust takes time. No, it really doesn't, with the exception of reliability. That takes time because we don't call somebody reliable unless we have repeated experiences of them over time.
Mhm.
So anyway, the other two variables are both of what I call more emotional. And the first one is intimacy, the third one in the numerator. And I know it's an unusual word in the business context. What we
Yeah.
really mean is kind of safety, security. I feel okay sharing this information with this person. If I say this to them, they're not going to laugh at me. Or if they do, it'll be appropriate, or if I share, they're not going to reveal it inappropriately. They're not going to, treat me badly, pull a fast one on me. They're not going to use this as a con job operation. I think I'm okay sharing this information with this person. I feel safe. So that's the sense in which we mean intimacy. And again, all three of those are positive attributes. We have a self-assessment form of the trust equation called the trust quotient. People can take it themselves,
Mhm.
and those three are the positive attributes.
So those are the three that are on the numerator.
The
Tell us
numerator.
about the denominator.
Yeah, the denominator, and the way it's written, it would appear to have three times the weight of the top three. We don't mean that literally, but it is pretty powerful. It's self-orientation, and it has to do with motives and attention. The most obvious form of it is somebody who's selfish, in it for themselves, hustler, con, the caricature of a used car salesman. You shake hands, count your fingers, that kind of thing. So that's one form of high self orientation. It's pretty obvious. We know how to spot that. And in the corporate world, it's not that common, partly because it's easy to spot. The other one that is the other form of it that is much more pernicious and much more common, and we all have it, is self preoccupation, just constantly thinking of everything in terms of ourselves. Are they paying attention to me? Are they listening? Do they like me? Do they not like me? How come they're not paying attention to me? How come they are paying attention to me? Just 1,000 forms of neurotic self obsession all the time, and it drives us into our head, and the constant, the itty gritty bitty shitty committee in your head, that constantly chattering, and which basically distracts you from being able to pay attention to the person in front of you. And we all feel this in a very visceral way. When you're talking to somebody and they're not paying attention. We know when they're self preoccupied and they ask one question that has nothing to do with what you just said, they're not paying attention to you. And that turns out to be a killer when it comes to being trustworthy. So it's a pretty powerful component. And that one together with intimacy are unlike the two rational ones. They're not easy to measure. They're not easy to quantify. And yet they are no less real. Every one of us feels in our gut when you run into somebody, you feel, I don't want to share this with that person, or that
Mhm.
guy's not even listening to me. I don't trust him. He's not even paying attention to me. He's all
Mhm.
wrapped up in his head. So they're the rational and the emotional. And by the way, everybody who has models of trustworthiness, and there are other models,
Sure.
but they all have at least one of each of those two components, one rational and one emotional. So trustworthiness is kind of an interesting blend of the rational and the, for lack of a better word, the emotional. So
It
I'll
is,
stop there.
yeah, and you're right. So Sandra Sucher, whose book is over this
Yep.
shoulder, has her trust model at the enterprise level for businesses, which is that
Yep.
trust is earned through competence, motives, means, and impact.
Yep.
And then Stephen Covey has his model, which is um, character and competence.
Yeah.
And so they both have, in
They
Covey's
both have
model, it's
those two
character, and her
components.
model, it's motives, and your
That's
model
right.
is intimacy and self orientation. But so I've studied this work. I've studied trust really for the better part of the past 5 years, and leadership for the past 20 years. And what I have seen, without a doubt, is that these two pieces, for in your model, it's intimacy and self orientation, are the hardest to wrap our heads and our hearts around. The
Yeah.
hardest. And I'm wondering if you can tell us why. Why are these so damn hard?
Well, yeah, I definitely have an answer to that. I think because, and here I'm going to go off on a grossly overgeneralized rant, if you will, because in the modern business world, the last 50 or 100 years, we have fetishized um, numeracy, quantification, numbers, data, spreadsheets, behavioral stuff. Um, this has been the direction of science and education in general, and of business in particular. We've all come to worship. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. That famous saying, which is ridiculous on the face of it, I think. Of course you can. There's 1,000 ways to manage without measuring, but we've come to worship at that altar. Another
Yeah.
minor example: I don't think you'll find a single MBA school that actually teaches personal selling. They have programs in sales management, sales research, et cetera, but it's all only if you could dress it up as an academically respectable discipline. That means numbers and models and so forth. And the truth is, we all walk around every single day in 1,000 different instances. We react to people in front of us. We talk to people. We have reactions. We create relationships. And we're not that far evolved in the 800,000 or a million years we've been on the planet. We all started out that way, and it's not gone just because we invented the spreadsheet 50 years ago and the internet 20 years ago. We're still very much, emotional, social animals as well as rational thinking creators. So why is it hard? Because we've been overeducated to believe that if you can't measure it, it doesn't mean anything.
Hmm.
That's my answer.
So with that context, right? If you can't measure it, it doesn't mean anything. Sort of as the just sort of the cultural milieu, right?
Yeah.
But those behaviors don't actually earn trust, and in turn, trust is what ultimately drives business outcomes. I firmly believe, and a lot of the data shows, at
Yeah.
least the best
Agree.
business outcomes. Um, what advice do you have for an incoming leader, let's say, and who? What's the one thing they can do to lower their self-orientation on day one of their new role?
Hmm. Well, wow. If I whole bunch of things. I mean, I'll pick one, kind of my favorite. Just meditate on that idea. It's not about you.
Yeah.
And you can go back to religious traditions, spiritual traditions. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, current bestseller,
Yeah.
talks has a wonderful chapter about exactly the power of the spiritual tradition of get the heck out of your own stupid head. Just meditate on that and recognize. You mentioned before we got on the podcast today an exercise you recently did, asking people to describe what the most effective people they trusted in their lives were, and you came up with sort of this answer of other focus, low self orientation,
Yeah.
the ability to pay attention to others and care. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
And if you think hard about it, you will end up role modeling that behavior. And role modeling is a huge way for leaders to demonstrate anything, but especially when it comes to trust. We don't trust people who treat it like another corporate change initiative. We trust people who live it and who act it out. And one of the more powerful things. So my quick answer, and maybe this only works for me, but I think just meditate on the notion it's not all about me.
Yeah. So you said something interesting. You said remember the people who've lived it out. And I can't help but ask you, who in your life
Ah,
has lived it out?
um, good question. Um, huh, you think I'd have a good answer for that one? I can
This is
think
what
of
you
a few people. Yeah, I know. It's what what I talk about. A few people whose iconic stories I've seen do, kind of remarkable things. No, I'm not going to dive into an anecdote on that one. I'm sorry, I don't have a good, quick, clean answer to that.
That's
There
okay.
have been
Well,
several, but
that's okay. And so I want to dig in a little bit to
yeah,
self-orientation before we move on. You
sure,
have called self-orientation, a high degree of self-orientation in particular, the
right,
great killer of trust. And
yes,
I'm wondering why it's so hard for even really well-intentioned leaders to see their own self-orientation.
right,
And I'll say in my own life, sometimes this has been true. I've had to have people come to me and say, Jonathan, you're acting very selfishly right now. And I didn't
yeah,
see it until they pointed it out to me. Why
yeah.
is it so hard to see that? And how do you help leaders recognize it without triggering defensiveness?
Well, that's a really good question because I think it's one of these things that we can seek progress, but not perfection. Nobody gets perfect on that stuff. So there's always room to grow. And it's very hard for any of us to hear what sounds like criticism about something so fundamental. You're selfish. You're only paying attention to yourself. What? Me? No, I'm a good person. Da, 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 da. We all tend to react defensively to that. So it's an unattainable goal. I guess that's one reason. Another one is it's a high level of I won't call it spiritual, although you could, a high level of human evolvement, evolution, to be able to, consistently achieve above what's the level of Maslow's
Baseline?
hierarchy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that's way up there. To be able to focus on others, even in the face of things that would seem to throw us about and affect us and concern us and so forth. To nonetheless say, "I'm gonna pay attention to you." That's not an easy thing personally, psychologically.
Hmm.
So I do think that people who are able to achieve that are achieving a pretty high level of personal evolution, of a human being. It's there's a reason that you find the exalted spiritual leaders of history, the Buddha, Jesus, whatever you want to pick, Mahatma Gandhi, are pretty evolved human beings. That's the sense in which I'm talking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, Mandela, Martin Luther
Mhm,
King.
mhm.
We hold these people up with great respect because, in large part, they did not. They were able to achieve pretty high levels of really focusing on the good of other human beings, and we all recognize that as a really good thing. It's not easy.
I'm
So I
I'm
don't know
I'm
if that
mm,
answers your question.
no, it's not easy, and I'm reminded of the time that, 4 or 5 years ago, I led a national team, and we would see each other in person together for sort of 3 or 4-day events
Yeah,
about 4 times a year. And at these events, they would start and finish with a casual dinner, sort of
yeah,
a drop-in dinner as people flew in and made it to the hotel. Um, and a lot of times I would fly in a little early and go running and
yep,
maybe miss the dinner or come to the dinner right after my run. And I'm so grateful. A colleague stopped me after maybe one or two of these quarterly fly-ins and said, "Jonathan, you don't know it, I suspect, but which is nice of her to add. But in either not attending these casual drop-in dinners or in attending coming
Yeah.
straight from your run, you're sending a message
You're
to your team
sending
that
a
you don't.
message, right?
Yeah, and so you need to show up. You need to be there the whole time, and you need to be there in in your business clothes, which
Yeah.
is such a fundamentally obvious thing in retrospect.
In retrospect,
Time,
yeah.
I didn't see it
No.
because I was totally oriented to myself. I was
Yeah.
thinking about, I wanna get off that plane, I wanna go for a run, I wanna have a casual evening before the full day event starts the next day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it took
I'll
a f
give you a
yeah,
positive example on the same kind of idea. I remember watching the publisher of the Albany Times Union, who later became the publisher of the San Francisco Chronicle or one of those papers out there. And there was maybe 20 people in the room. It was a working session of all his, direct reports. And he didn't hardly say anything himself. He would just constantly scan the table and he'd say, "Joe, you reacted when Susie said that. What's on your mind?" And Joe would talk and he'd look around and he'd say, "Now, Philip, you and I talked about that very thing the other day. You want to share with the group what you had to say to me?" All he did was conduct the symphony of the people in the room. And I suppose on some level he knew quite well what he was doing, but he was just doing it. He was in the flow and he was totally related to other people. And did he get a good outcome? Yeah, because he's a good conductor, but it was also coming from a good place. He did not get wrapped up. He didn't preach anything. He didn't push any position. Abraham Lincoln had some of those same traits, able to play off people in the room.
so in your writings, you distinguish between ego-driven and fear-driven self-orientation, and I'm wondering which one you have wrestled with personally more in your own career and how you've learned to shift your focus back to the other.
Yeah, well, they both are, the self-oriented. That's the key thing. I guess for me personally, it's been more the fear-driven thing. If you ever, it's an interesting exercise. Sit down and write down the 10, 15, 20, 30 things that you're afraid of.
Yeah.
I mean, once you get going, it's endless. Oh my God, I'm afraid of looking like an idiot, afraid of not knowing what to do, afraid of judgment of others, afraid of look, we can all generate that list very quickly. An old kind of mentor of mine from years ago, um, he was not a psychologist, he was a CEO, but he was a pretty good amateur psychologist. And he said the root negative human emotion is fear. List all the other negative emotions and distill them down, and you'll find fear of something in them. And I thought, that's not a bad rule of thumb.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably been my, getting over fear. I mean, I've come up with little
How do
mantras
you
for
do
my,
it?
well,
How do you do
one
it?
way is I find effective for me is to recognize, frankly, nobody gives a damn. You know, they're all wrapped up in their own crazy stuff, right? They
Yeah.
got their own monsters under the bed that they're worried about. And if I can recognize that as actually liberating, they're not worried about me. I'm the only one who's worried about me. So I don't have to. I can focus on them, which they experience as gracious. We all love to have people pay attention to us. So hey, maybe I could do that. Pay attention to them. It works.
You use an interesting word there, gracious.
Yeah.
And in studying your work, that is a word that I've seen come up more than once. Learning to uh, live in a way that creates a gracious presence.
Yes.
And as we talk about self-orientation, um, it's about it's about behavior, of course, expressed behavior, but underneath that behavior, it's about quieting the ego. You have said that, quieting the ego,
Yes. Yeah.
and creating this gracious environment for people.
Right.
These are words that we don't use very often in business, and so I
Right.
can't help but ask, like, do you see trust-based leadership as a fundamentally spiritual practice? Because these are spiritual words that we're using:
Yeah.
graciousness,
Yeah.
quieting the ego.
Yeah. Well, I consider myself an atheist, so I don't think of it as religious. And you hear a lot of people say, "Well, I'm spiritual but not religious." Okay, but I do think it's as good a word as any, because I think that words like grace and spiritual, they all touch on the notion of connection with other human beings. And whether there's something metaphysical there or not, I doubt, but it doesn't matter. I think the ability to interact on some higher plane with good motives, with goodwill towards other people, is a hugely powerful thing. And to tap into that kind of belief system, to offer grace to other people, to use that language, is it's a higher evolved form of being. Um, yeah, you can call it spiritual, I guess. I don't have a better word for it, but it's a good thing and a high level good thing.
So, how do leaders sort of cultivate that spiritual practice, even if you're an atheist, without sounding soft or naive?
Uh, well, if you do, some of the religious traditions done rightly, purely, are not naive or soft at all. They can come out as very hard and direct. I think I don't think it's naive to be an optimist or to recognize, the power, the grace, the humanness, the humanity in other people. I just don't buy the idea that done rightly, that's perceived as soft. Done wrongly, it's perceived as soft, and you certainly can't, fake your intentions if you're trying to get by on someone or con them in a way by, playing to what you think their characteristics are. No, that's phony. But if you legitimately genuine seek out, the individual humanness in another human being, they almost always respond positively. And I only say almost just because I'm sure there's a counterexample somewhere, but I've never found it. If you approach people genuinely, legitimately, humbly, with curiosity, everybody responds positively to that. And that's not phony. That's not soft. That's not squishy. That's pretty hard stuff.
Yeah. So I'm gonna move on to sort of a related topic that most folks would say kind of is a hard science, which is KPIs and
Ah,
measurement.
right.
Consultants, and I'll raise my hand as a recovering
Recovering consultant. Yeah,
consultant,
sure.
and say um, that we love KPIs and we love measurement,
Yeah.
but trust evades measurement. And so I'm wondering if you've seen credible ways that organizations can track or quantify trustworthiness without just reducing it to a vanity metric. Just, yep, I'm going to check
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would make the argument anybody that's looking to do that, stop doing that. I mean, and I'll go off on a little rant here. I
Please
think
do.
one of the evils of modern business is this intense desire to metricize, quantify everything. And I'll just pick one example. One of the best books I've ever seen on business strategy was Fred Reichheld's The Loyalty Effect. He was with Bain, still is with Bain and Company. Did some great work with Harvard Business School, basically mapping out all the reasons why repeat business with existing customers is so much better, than constantly trying to seek out new clients. And loyalty, and he maps out all the behavioral, economic consequences of it. His reputation was not made by that book; it was made by one single KPI, the
Net promoter score.
thank you, the NPS, and everybody worships NPS because he got it down to one number. Well, it's an interesting number, and there's a whole huge industry, but it's nowhere near the accomplishment of what I think he outlaid in the loyalty effect. We've just worshipped at the altar of again, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. That phony belief. And if you go back to the trust equation or Sandra's equation or you know uh,
Cubbies
anybody's
or any other.
hobbies, exactly. Like you said, they all have an emotional component and a rational component. It's not hard to measure the rational component. It is hard to measure the emotional component. It raises the question: why would you? Why do you have to?
Yeah.
There are many other ways to get the point across other than deductive analytics,
Yeah.
storytelling, empathy, role modeling, um, plays, role plays. These are all kinds of ways that we can motivate people, make change in the world, and you don't have to freaking measure them. One of the biggest reasons to measure is so that you could turn it into incentive. Well, what's the incentive to make you less self-oriented? It's self-contradictory. And we're going to pay you money to be less self-oriented, less selfish. It's stupid. It is inherently self-contradictory on some level. So the obsession with trying to turn it into a number is absurd in the profound sense of that word. Absurd. It's don't do it, I would say. That
So there
said,
are these.
I will say we did ourselves at Trusted Advisor Associates create a self-assessment tool, a 20-question quantifying tool, rate your own trustworthiness. Now, in fact, it's a little deceptive because you can't read too much into a single number. There's some interesting data that comes out of it, but it's not reducing it to a number. It's a fool's quest.
I wonder if you've that assessment has existed now for many years, more than I think almost I
Yes.
think 20 years.
That's
or
right.
a little bit more than 20 years actually. I'm wondering if there's any sort of surprises or aha moments as you go through now with essentially metadata at this point, given the number of folks who've taken it.
Yeah.
Is there anything that surprises you as you're able to look back now with
Well, I think,
hundreds of thousands of people?
yeah, I think the key findings out of it that are, they're kind of intuitive when you think about it, but I'd say there are three. Number one is the trustworthiness scores go up with age. People score more highly on trustworthiness as they get older, and I think that makes sense. We
Mm,
certainly gain more experience. You don't necessarily get wiser with age, but on average, we do.
yeah.
So that one makes some sense to me. It's nice to see it kind of, and I've seen more anecdotally within organizations, you get higher trustworthiness scores at higher levels in the organization, which is encouraging. It means you're looking at a meritocracy, I would argue. So that's one. The other one, which is intriguing, women tend to score more highly than men,
Hmm,
and that. And actually, if you ask men, and you say that, men go, "Yeah, that kind of makes sense." Um, the reason for it turns out to be it's not credibility, it's not reliability, and it's not self orientation. Women tend to score more highly on intimacy
hmm.
than men do. And again, that makes on some gut level, never mind all the stereotypes, that sort of intuitively makes a little bit of common sense. Women tend to be a little better at that sort of thing. I think most people would nod their heads at that. And it's all concentrated in that one. And I find confirming in that is that uh, Gallup does a poll every year on most and least trusted professions. It's not exactly that term, but it amounts to that, most trusted profession. And 19 out of the last 20 years, nurses have been number one.
Hmm.
Predominantly a female profession, not solely, but predominantly. No accident. And that relates to the third finding, which is surprising, which we ran a regression analysis on a lot of that data. And of the four factors in the trust equation, the most powerful turns out to be intimacy by a small margin over self orientation. So even though we depicted the S as being three times more powerful, actually, when you equally weight them, intimacy has a slight edge. And both of them are well ahead of credibility and reliability. So the most powerful driver of trustworthiness turns out to be being good at that intimacy thing.
Who have you seen who is really good at that, and
Oh,
what did
wow.
they do?
Geez, I take your pick. Um,
Like, what does it mean to be, and sort of, I can think about being intimate with a dear friend in terms of sort
yes,
of what I share, right, and
right,
the
right,
level of vulnerability. But in
right.
the public spheres of life, what does it mean to be intimate?
Well, let me take a controversial one. First of all, Bill Clinton, back in the day, never
Mhm.
mind his checkered past and reputation and so forth, he was known as being really good at connecting with people. He had this line, I feel your pain. And he
Yeah.
could say it in a way that people did. I remember there was a story. He was on some government tour in India and he was out working the crowds. And some woman in the crowd, of course, doesn't know him from Adam, says, oh, it's like he's speaking to me directly.
Mhm.
I'm thinking, my God, he could do it in India. He can do it anywhere. So he's a weird example. But, Nelson Mandela, who's, geez. I think in some ways, I'm just pulling stuff out of the air here. Larry David, has a way of revealing himself that maybe it's partly an act, but it's also he reveals that inner part of all of us that we all have a inner Larry David, and he's
Totally.
being honest about it. Uh, people who are willing to reveal themselves, and you feel like, oh, that guy's telling the truth
Mm.
when you hear him. I'm sorry, I can't think off the top of my head, but
That's
I think
okay.
anybody
Eh,
listening to this probably can.
it's funny, I have an older sister named Catherine who is, very openly vulnerable,
Uh huh.
and at first, it scared the hell out of me, like, you're
Yeah.
saying so much, how can you say so much?
Yeah.
And then I noticed a trend, which is she has more friends than anyone I've ever met
Yeah.
because people are magnetically attracted to her,
Yes.
vulnerability and her
Yeah.
realness. And it's edgy sometimes, and it's, a little bit
Yep.
gritty sometimes,
Yep.
but it's relatable. So,
Totally.
um, I every company right now claims to be authentic,
Yeah.
transparent, and there are transparency scales.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you think that sort of I'm gonna call it the overuse of
Yeah.
those words. Does it dilute the meaning of trust?
Well, in a weird way, no, I don't think it does. I think you can spot a fake,
Yeah.
especially when George Burns, the comedian, once said, the most important thing in life is sincerity. If you can fake that, you got it made. And I think transparency is a bit like that. Anybody who says, I'm being totally transparent here, I don't believe them.
Yeah.
It's like I always tell people, never call yourself a trusted advisor. Let other people say it about you. That's fine, but don't you ever say it, for God's sake. You're immediately a liar. So
Yeah.
I think people who have to claim to be authentic, and I think it serves to sharpen, like the advent of AI deepfake videos, has
Mhm.
sharpened our discernment about. I bet you that's fake,
Mm.
and more often than not. Well, I don't know about more often. We're right. So I think it's actually sharpened our skills at discerning what really is authentic, and in that sense, I don't
Mm.
think maybe it's had a good effect.
Yeah, interesting.
We don't take it for granted.
What about when the flip happens? When trust is broken, and
Yeah,
it inevitably is in almost every relationship
yeah,
at some stage.
yeah.
Um, what's the kind of an overlooked perhaps step that folks can take to repair trust, whether with a client or a loved one?
Yeah, well, it's there are two steps that are key to it, and by the way, there's more research in the area of customer relationships that parallels this that says a broken relationship that's overcome is stronger than one initially. If you can recover, and I think the same is true for trust. If you can recover from broken trust, and it is possible, then you're actually stronger than maybe you were before it had been tested. And there are two key steps. Number one is acknowledge, fully, completely acknowledge your part, not anybody else's part. Don't get into apportioning blame. The ability to just say, listen, this happened, and I was responsible for the following 85% of it. That's on me. I did it. Boom, put it out there. No varnish. And the second part is critical. Don't dare pull back on that. Don't say, well, but in my, in my defense, no, don't even go there. And don't be tempted to throw in a little bit, well, he did this too. I'm not the only one. No, in fact, you're better off, if anything, slightly over exaggerating your responsibility, just slightly. But don't let it bleed into blame, and don't let it bleed into excuses. Just put it out there straight and clean. Um, you do that, and people say, well, all right, at least you owned up to it. We
Yeah.
give people a lot of credit for doing that because it isn't that common. Most people screw it up.
Mm. I was reading a memory of a time in the Oval Office that the President Bush pulled his entire team Mrs. Bush's entire team into the Oval Office to he pulled Mrs. Bush's entire team into the Oval Office to talk about his leadership ethos. And I was just reading this a few days ago, and one of the things he told us about was that he believes so strongly that America is for everybody, regardless of creed or religion. And then he told us about a time when a soldier had died under his command. This is, of course, during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And many soldiers, unfortunately, and airmen and Marines and
Yeah,
sailors died. Um, but this particular person uh, was Wiccan, and his wife, his widowed wife, um, of course, was grieving, and the president was calling families of the fallen for folks who'd passed in service that week, and somehow he had inadvertently missed this wife, the widow of this fallen service member who was Wiccan. And I think she had gone to the media and said, "He didn't call me. He called everyone else who passed. It
yeah,
must be because I'm Wiccan."
ah,
And the the president said, "I called her and apologized profusely
yeah,
because it was simply a bureaucratic oversight. The paperwork got messed up. It had nothing to do with religion. But I was just so struck by his phrase. I called her and I apologized profusely."
yeah,
Kind of like grabbing by the throat as I reread that memory just a few days ago, because
yeah,
it does exactly what you just said. He he overemphasized his own role.
yeah,
He apologized profusely for something that was not his fault, and then made it clear what his intention was. Um,
yeah.
so
That is a powerful story. By the way, you need to be careful. The reason I don't use the word apology
yeah.
is because you need to be very careful about what is your fault and what isn't.
Mm,
You're in dangerous territory once you start apologizing for things that weren't your fault.
hmm,
Let somebody else fill in those blanks. You don't need to paint it. If you're clear about what you are responsible for, and by the way, I agree. What I love in that story is Bush overdid, overemphasized. I called personally and I profusely. Yes, yes, yes. But once you start, falling into, apologizing for something that's not your fault, you're in dangerous territory. It may be okay here because it was a bureaucratic error, and that's worth pointing out. Maybe I'm trying to make it a little abstract point
That's
to a great
interesting.
story.
That's interesting. So I want to wrap up here with you, and sort of at the when all is said and done,
Yeah.
what do you want to be known for?
um, Good question. Uh, I think the work that I've done in trust over the years, I'm proud of. I think I've been able to, you know, articulate some things in a useful way. But more broadly than that, I guess, I'd like people to say, he's a decent guy. He didn't take himself too seriously. He had a good mind. He came up with some cool ideas. He once did me a solid. He was flawed, but net net, he did okay. I'd be fine with that.
Well, I'll say your cool ideas, your good ideas have changed and are changing my life for the better. So I
Oh,
thank
you're
you.
very kind. I
Thank
do
you for being on the
appreciate that.
podcast today. I appreciate it
Thank
so
you.
much.
It's a pleasure, always.
Thank you.